Hey, everybody. Welcome to Politics, your one-stop shop for all things politics, all things Texas. We're going to have a great show today. We're going to hear from Chris Tomlinson, who writes a business column for the San Antonio Express News and the Houston Chronicle, and has a pretty good expertise when it comes to our energy and electric system in the state of Texas. And then we're also going to hear from State Representative Jessica González. Jessica is a state rep and the vice chair of our House Elections Committee. As you probably read in the paper, there was a huge meltdown in the Elections Committee. Well, this person had a up front row seat, and she can tell us her perspective as to what the meltdown was all about in that committee. And then finally, before we close, I want to wish Our Lady Longhorns good luck today. They are playing in the Sweet 16 women's NCAA basketball here in San Antonio. I've got my shirt on. We're rooting for you. Horns up, ladies. We're going to have a great show. Thank you for listening. Welcome back, everybody. We are pleased to have Chris Tomlinson. You might recognize him or know his name. He writes a column in the business section for both the San Antonio Express News and the Houston Chronicle. Prior to that, I know that Chris spent many years working for the Associated Press. And that's kind of where he and I first met more than a decade ago. So, Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, it's good to be on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you. Short notice and everything. Listen, I've been following your writing. You've been saying everything that I've been thinking. And so for those who haven't kept up with your columns, I mean, you've really been analyzing this energy issue from the moment of the blackouts. And you've probably been doing some of the deeper digging in terms of finding, where the fault lines are and where the shortcomings of the state and industry. And you've just been very consistent with your reporting. And so let's take our listeners back a little bit. I know that when you and I met, it's more than a decade ago. I back then was challenging ERCOT on some reforms, and this is kind of after the fact that there were these false load transfers. This is the behavior that got Enron in trouble, where they were, being paid to not submit energy load, and this was energy load they never had to send anyway, but they figured out a financial way to do it. And then from those days and in the ensuing years, I took a really tough approach on ERCOT, and I think that's where you and I met. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, how long you've been following industry, the energy industry and electricity industry in the state of Texas?
Well, for most of my career, I was a foreign correspondent reporting on global energy, reporting on the global oil trade, reporting from the Middle East. And then I came back to Texas in 2008 and became part of the Texas Press Corps, where I led the Associated Press Bureau. I was political editor for Texas. And then for the last 6 years, I've been a columnist for the business section of Hearst newspapers in Texas. And of course, energy is the big business in Texas. So I've kind of dug deep into it. I would also, a full disclosure, my wife also works in the clean energy realm. She works for a private equity firm now, but she used to work for a wind and solar company as well. So it's been a topic around our dinner table as well as my kind of professional obligation.
No, but nevertheless, I mean, this is something you've been working on pretty much, a lot of your professional career as a journalist.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, energy is behind everything. From that gallon of milk you buy at the grocery store to turning on the light switch. Energy is what makes our modern life possible, and that's why it's so important that we get it right.
Right, and we all felt that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was done.
Oh, okay, my bad. We all felt the effects of just how central energy is in our lives when we went through this weather storm Uri, polar vortex, the snowvid, whatever you want to call it. I mean, again, round numbers, 4.5 million people without electricity, 15 million people without water, impacted a tremendous amount of our state. And I remember, we're fortunate in our home that we have a lot of windows. So during the day, we have bright light. And I remember reading a newspaper during the storm and some reporting, and it made me think of you. And if you recall, I reached out to you and said, man, I want to talk to you about this. And I think your response to me was, hey, I'd love to. Thank you for reaching out, but I'll have some time between my columns, my deadlines on my columns, and I'm dealing with some busted pipes. I mean, you were impacted by the storm, weren't you?
Oh, yeah. We were 82 hours without electricity. We lost 9 pipes and the main valve on our external hot water heater. And it took us 10 days to get everything repaired and operational again. It was, and I felt it as much as anyone else in the state. And, I was shoveling snow to fill buckets so we could flush the toilets, and relying on my natural gas stove for heat. So yeah, I was caught up in all those things and still trying to write 3 columns a week about why this was happening and why the system had failed us, frankly, to an audience where most Texans have no idea that we had this competitive market with no guardrails that created the conditions in which we could have this kind of failure, something that no other grid has ever witnessed.
And do you think you can tell us, just sort of in a very, lay perspective, I mean, how did we get here, and how many things went wrong along the way?
Well, we are a state that believes in free enterprise and competitive markets. And 20 years ago, we decided that instead of having these utilities that are closely regulated that would guarantee us the right amount of power at the right time, we would open this up to competition, that we would allow the free market and private enterprise to hopefully give us cheaper electricity. And it works most of the time, except when we get in these extreme periods, particularly in the winter. And, we had a problem in 2011. We had blackouts on the coldest day of the year because the generators weren't ready. And instead of learning lessons from that, we continued on with this idea that if we just offer people more and more money, if we encourage them with price gouging when we need electricity the most, that somehow they would come through for us. And the Texas blackout snowvid proved that that doesn't work.
Right, because there's no amount of money that you can pay somebody when your power plants aren't operating. I think you reported thus far 185 power plants on the Texas grid went offline.
Yeah, that was in the first night. That's what triggered the complete collapse. And then we saw as many as 400 generating units fail and come back or work for a while and then go offline over that 5-day period, over those 100 some odd hours that we had a crisis. And it's a very complex system. And some of these failures were through no fault of the power plants themselves. But those first 185 that tripped off, that was their failure to prepare.
And what we're finding, at least what I'm observing through all these conversations and hearings and meetings and research, when you ask people, well, hey, what went wrong with the winter blackouts, you kind of get this, it wasn't me, it's those guys or it's those guys. And frankly, I mean, that doesn't satisfy me. That doesn't satisfy people who were boiling snow to flush their toilets in San Antonio. They were pulling river water out of the San Antonio River. There's a senior citizen apartment complex where they were taking 5-gallon buckets of water to flush toilets for senior citizens. That's not an acceptable answer. And so, we're in the stage now where we can do something. You observed last week the Texas Senate in dealing with the issue of repricing, passed by an overwhelming majority, 28-3, a legislation that said Public Utility Commission, you will reprice that electricity. And it just went over like a lead balloon in the House. I pulled out my rule book. I tried to force a debate by a couple of procedures that we know as calling a special order, which essentially brings the bill to the floor for debate. And the speaker said, "I'm not going to recognize you for that." It's very frustrating. Your reporting this morning said something that you've sort of been following debate. You've looked at the bills that are filed thus far, and the response is a little underwhelming from your perspective. Tell us about that.
Well, the House is where the friction is, really. I mean, it's not very often that I praise Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, but I think he was on the right side of this with the repricing. I think some of the bills in the Senate have some promise. But if you go over to the House, the five bills that, they're bragging about, that the Republican leadership says is going to fix the problem, those five bills really do nothing except advise the PUC to maybe set a rule. And that's not going to cut it. That's not going to bring the change that we need. One of my frustrations is that we can't even get to the heart of the matter and find out what actually happened that night. Me and a lot of other journalists have asked ERCOT to turn over documents that would reveal who did what when. And we've seen every generator in the state of Texas file paperwork with the Attorney General to have all of that kept confidential. So that, if all we have is the public testimony at your hearings where everyone's pointing the finger at someone else, and the Attorney General declares all of ERCOT's records confidential because it's supposedly commercially proprietary information, then we may never know exactly what happened and why it happened. And then, folks like you guys in the legislature won't know what laws to pass. But so far, as I said in today's column, the bills that are moving through are all talk and no walk, and they're not going to really accomplish anything.
It's interesting you say that. Like I'm looking at one of these bills, and it's it's House Bill 11, and and just like you, old school, we just make notes and underline things. And I noticed that we're asking providers to do certain things, but it's make a reasonable effort. Do your best. I mean, there's really no mandate that you must do this, you'll do this, and you'll do it by time certain. I'm not picking that up in some of this legislation. Is that what you're seeing?
No, I mean, there are engineering standards that you can set by legislation. You can say you have to reach these particular standards of weatherization. And the bill doesn't do that. It just tells the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, you should set a rule to encourage people to be ready for extreme weather. And there's no penalty if you don't prepare. Right. And that's kind of the problem that we ran into before, is that, the idea was that if you tell generators that they might be able to make $9,000 a megawatt hour when the normal price is 22, if they are prepared for a winter storm that may happen or may not happen, then if I'm the CEO of that company building that generation plant, I've got a choice of spending a lot of money on something that might happen, in which I might get a payoff, or I can just sit back and say, hey, if it freezes, it freezes. That's not my problem, because I'm not going to suffer any consequences if I fail to provide Texans the energy they need. And it's that absence of a penalty that means that generators will never spend the extra dollars to be ready for that hot summer day or that cold winter night, because they don't have to. And there's no penalty if they don't.
And should that penalty, should it be financial? Should it be, some sort of criminal penalty? Both?
I'm not sure it should be a criminal penalty, but it should certainly be a civil one. I've recommended that if you want to participate in the Texas market, you have to meet certain weatherization standards before you're allowed to participate. So if you've got a natural gas plant outside of Houston and it's not prepared for a cold winter's night, well, you're not allowed to use it at all in the state of Texas. That should be the rule. The rule is, if you want to play the game, if you want to be part of our market, you have to meet certain engineering minimum standards. And we don't have that at all in Texas right now.
Well, interesting. You brought up the issue of journalists not being able to get access to this information of ERCOT. And I noticed in one of these proposals, House Bill 13, this is the one that creates yet another entity. We had miscommunication with the Railroad Commission, the Public Utility Commission, and ERCOT. Now the solution is, let's create a fourth entity so that, we can have a fourth party that is going to have to be contacted. And I'm not sure, I'm still reading it, but I did notice in the end pages that provisions what appear to be the Open Meetings and the Open Records Act do not apply to this council. I'll double check it, but and I want you to grade my paper on it, but it's House Bill 13 and it's page 4, line 1. And like I said, I started reading these this morning and I need to do more work on it, but that would be a bad idea in your opinion, don't you think?
Oh, of course. I mean, this is a classic, no offense, Representative, but this is a classic political maneuver. This is the blue ribbon panel that's going to solve the problem, but actually not ever do anything of any substance. We should not need yet another state council, agency, or whatever you want to call it, or commission, when we have a Public Utilities Commission, when we have a Railroad Commission, whose job it is to guarantee the Texans have the energy they need when they need it. And of course, the reason why they want to create this new council for emergency preparedness is so they can exclude it from the Public Information Act, so that they don't have to show their work and reveal to Texans how the system is designed to benefit generators and the electrical power industry and not guarantee reliability to Texans.
That's interesting. Well, it's a good point, and I would just encourage you to take a look at that page to make sure I'm right. Now, speaking of not wanting things to make it out into the public, last week there was a release of an audio tape of our one and only Public Utility Commissioner. And for those listening to the show, I mean, we're supposed to have 3, as you know. 2 of them resigned as a reaction to this blackout, facing political pressure and so forth. Now, and then the last remaining commissioner happened to be the chairman, Commissioner Deandra. You saw, and I believe you have commented that he was observed and recorded on a phone call for Bank of America, presumably for some sort of bank clients or investment clients, and he essentially spilled the goods and talked about his job at the commission is to make sure that the money stayed in the hands of the energy traders that made all their money and was going to work against repricing electricity to put it back in the pockets of consumers. I mean, that just blew me away. I mean, what did you think when you heard that tape?
Well, I mean, first, hats off to Lauren Steffi at Texas Monthly. He was my predecessor at the Houston Chronicle. He got his hands on this tape recorded call that was supposed to be closed to the public, closed to the media. It was for Wall Street analysts to decide where to put their money. And Deandra said, hey, don't worry, we're not going to change anything. We're not going to reduce the prices that we charge Texans. We're not going to overhaul the market. We're not going to hold anyone responsible. Your investments are safe in companies that do business in Texas, and you will get those big profits you were expecting from $9,000 a megawatt hour electricity. It was stunning because he is the only member of the Public Utilities Commission. The important word there is public. And he is supposed to be protecting the public and making sure the industry delivers the utilities we need, not making sure that Wall Street keeps their profits. And, I think it's remarkable that Governor Abbott did not ask for his resignation until after Texas Monthly published that recording.
Yeah, no, I fell out of my chair. I mean, it just, very strident in his remarks. I, encourage people to listen to the tape. We should, make the link available. It's pretty easy to find by, looking up Texas Monthly Magazine on that reporting. But Chris, we've covered a whole lot. I mean, I just, I can't emphasize, how important this issue is. Just encourage you to keep, holding us accountable. This pod was created because, people don't know what happens over here. They elect people like me and they think things are going to get done. And, when I'm shopping at HEB on the weekends, I mean, there are people who have questions about, who exactly are we working for up there? I mean, this pod was created to break down and sort of give people an insider's perspective as to, the collision course between politics and policy. So, please keep up the good work that you're doing and hold us accountable. I appreciate that. Thank you for listening. If you have a suggestion for the show or an idea for a potential episode, I value your feedback. Email your suggestions to contact@TreyMartinezFischer.com. As always, thank you for listening to Politics. Hey, everybody, welcome back. We are now joined by State Representative Jessica González. She is the Vice Chair of the House Committee on Elections. She's in her second term. She's from Dallas. She's a practicing lawyer in the Dallas area. Jessica, welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, you had a big week. And so look, first I'll tell you just on behalf of everybody who believes in things being sane and rational, thank you for the work you did this past week. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to catch up, there was a very big hearing on Thursday. It was a House Bill 6, a priority legislation for the Republican Party, led by the chairman of elections, Briscoe Cain. This is going to be the ugly election reform bill that you've been hearing about all over the country, where Republican legislatures all over the country are trying to redo the math or trying to reconfigure the electoral system to gain an advantage at elections because they're losing. So this is when you're not winning, you change the rules. We all knew it was coming. It was a very big hearing. We were expecting a full day of testimony, and then all of a sudden it came to a complete halt in large part to the work of Vice Chair Jessica González. So Jessica, look, take everybody through what was this bill about, and talk to us about that committee process when you were presiding, you were the person with the gavel presiding over that hearing, and how did things fall apart?
Well, I mean, this bill is probably one of the most horrible bills that I think we've ever seen in Texas history as far as attacks on voting rights. I mean, we're seeing them across the country, especially in states in the South, right? But I mean, this bill is a litany of just horrible restrictive measures when it comes to voting access. For example, and it actually makes it harder for folks with disabilities to even be able to vote. So there's lots of restrictions in there that ultimately would impact people of color. But I mean, it goes as far as requiring people to provide, a doctor's note to show that you have a disability. Now, a person who truly has a disability is, there's going to be that inability to be able to get that doctor's note, right? There's also other things that lie with that, like HIPAA violations that I don't think that they've thought about. And all these barriers, right? They're aimed at just suppressing the vote because when the game doesn't turn out your way, you want, just like you said, you want to change the rules, and that's what they're trying to do. We saw this happen in 2010 after President Obama won his first election as president. But no, we were the committee is stacked in a way that legislation or bills can get through without any Democrats even voting in favor of it. And so we're already stacked in a way that is going to hurt us. And so yes, we were expecting to be there all night and really just have what I would hope would have been a healthy debate on these issues. We had people coming from all over the state that drove hours to come testify. I think the last time I had checked, we had over 150 people that had signed up, including Beto O'Rourke. And so it was going to be, I thought it was going to be a good day for us to talk about some of these real issues. Let's talk about truth, transparency, because what we're hearing, they're all lies. Right? That voter fraud does not truly exist. At any rate, that was the big bill we were hearing that day. As common practice, when it's the chair's bill, they hand it off to the vice chair to preside over the committee as the chair lays out their bill. Now, Chair Collier, who's also the chair of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus, requested to ask some questions from the dais. And so, my understanding, in my short time even there, it's my understanding that it's common practice to if a colleague requests to sit on the dais and be part of this debate as we deliberate this bill, that it's just common practice. And Chair Cain refused to allow me to recognize her after the members in the committee had already asked her questions. And so it got to a point that he was basically took the gavel back for me and would not allow me to recognize her. And I tried several times, and it was just a blatant, I mean, at that point, it's like, it's not even trying to hide, right? Your biases that you have. I mean, we have no Black people that serve on elections committee. I mean, her voice was important. important for her community, for the African American community of Texas, to ask these questions, because there's not anybody on the committee to give that perspective, and so I would not let down, because I thought it was very disrespectful in the way that he was treating me and that he was treating Chair Collier, two women of color that were sitting up at the dais, and he made a lethal procedural mistake by going into recess and not giving a definite time when we were returning. And so because of that, we were not able to proceed with the hearing. And so unfortunately, the folks that had driven down to testify that day were not able to testify.
Wow.
And so,
oh, well, it just, what that sounds to me like is a whole bunch of good trouble, number one. But just to recap things, this is your second term. This is my 10th term. When the chairman hands the gavel over to a vice chair during the committee, you're in control, you're in charge. So the idea that anybody, whether it be Chair Kane or anybody else on that committee, try to tell you what to do or to, try to recess, you're driving, you're in the driver's seat, and you have that power. So when someone tries to take that away from you, that to me begs a question all by itself, number one. And then number two, we've always had this courtesy, you don't get to pick your committees, unfortunately. You have to have some seniority and the speaker decides. So if there's something going on in the committee that you care about, you always ask for permission to sit at the dais. You're always given that courtesy. And then after the members of the committee have had their say, there's always been that courtesy that we afford to non-committee members to ask questions. And so that's all you were trying to do, and they wouldn't let you?
yes, exactly. And even last session, when Stephanie Click was chair of elections, she allowed Rafael Lanchia to sit on the dais and ask questions for the big ugly elections bill last session. Even yesterday, when the Senate heard SB 7, which is the Senate version of HB 6, the chair there, he allowed Senator West to sit in and ask questions as well. So again, this is not anything that's this was unprecedented that he behaved this way, and it was a complete power play. It was a complete power play.
Wow. Well, that just on so many levels is wrong. And if you don't have anything to hide, this legislative process, you bring your ideas, you lay them out for scrutiny, you get questioned by your committee members, we hear from witnesses. That's the legislative process. But what you're telling me is that he wants to lay out his proposal, but if you disagree with it, he's going to find a way to silence your voice. Yes,
exactly. And the thing is, we've seen some of this practice already, even just leading up to this big hearing on Thursday, and just trying to censor the exchange of that exchange between witnesses or the author of the bill and the Democratic members on the committee. It's important, as you know, to ask these questions about what kind of impact it has on certain communities of color. I represent a district that is 80% non-white, right? And so for me, that's what I was sent here to do. I was sent here to ask these questions about how it affects people in my district. And so for those questions to be censored, you're not letting me do my job.
Right. Well, I also think too, when it comes to the voices of the folks that we represent, when you shut that off, Nicole Collier is an African-American female, and she chairs the Legislative Black Caucus, not a single African-American on your committee. Obviously, her perspective is important, right? And to arbitrarily be told, we're not going to listen to you. I don't think that's going to go over very well when people start looking at our process. Say something like this ends up in the court system. This is not a good look for the state of Texas and the Republican Party.
I agree.
Well, so what are the next steps? You said there's a committee hearing already scheduled for next week?
Yeah, the posting came out yesterday, and so we're scheduled to rehear HB 6 next Thursday.
Okay, all right. Well, good. Well, we need to do, everybody watching this pod, this committee will be on Thursday. You can find that information at the Texas Legislative website. It'll be on Thursday. We need to hear from you. We need to make sure that people like Jessica González and the members of the committee know that we're paying attention to this and just how important it is. We're talking about our right to vote here, and state by state, there are efforts by Republican-controlled legislatures to change the rules, not because they're winning, but because they're losing. And so listen, Vice Chair Gonzalez, I really appreciate you, number one, taking time on a Saturday. This is supposed to be our day off, but it's so important of an issue. I felt like we had to talk about it, get it out there, and let people also talk about it. And let's turn this talk into action. So listen, I appreciate it on behalf of everybody who cares about voting and cares about voting fairness. And just, keep doing what you're doing. And we're so glad that you're on elections. Well, there you have it. What a great show. I want to thank my guests, Chris Tomlinson and Vice Chairwoman Jessica González from the Big D. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Please send us your ideas. And until then, we will see you next week on Politex.